MSW Media.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So now it's clean up on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be clean up on aisle 45.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 174 of Clean Up on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, as you're hearing this, May 22nd, 2024. I'm Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Strzok. The judge in the Trump election interference case feels that summation won't happen Tuesday, so we're recording this episode on Monday afternoon. As of now, the prosecution is rested, and Cohen is finished with his testimony, direct, cross, redirect, he's done, and we'll talk about what's happened for the past few days.
Yeah, and since we've decided to not record this on Tuesday last minute and that we're going to record it on Monday, that means something really important is going to happen tomorrow that we couldn't anticipate, Pete. So if that does happen, we will have a break-in right now. Okay, if you heard nothing, then that means that, just the regular kind of stuff happened tomorrow, and we'll report on the rest of it on this weekend's bonus and next week's main episode. Also, today we're going to talk about Rudy Giuliani's 80th birthday celebration and how basically a process server jumped out of a cake. It's fantastic. He was finally
sailor.
Surprise. I just keep thinking of Total Recall. Get ready for a surprise. And it was amazing. Okay, so he was finally served with his indictment from Arizona prosecutors. And we're going to talk about Trump's brief appeal, or the notice of appeal of the E. Jean Carroll verdict. That's the $83.3 million one. But first, it is Hall of Fame Patron Day on Clean Up on Aisle 45. So we get to thank our Hall of Famers. These are folks who contribute and pledge $10 at least per episode, and, are really huge contributors in making this show possible, making it possible for me to travel to New York and hire line sitters and all that stuff, and help the production of this show, everything behind the scenes, from our incredible editors to our network director. You help with all of that. We can't thank you enough. Christine G. Passion. Devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for an election to steal. He was in a bind. He was way behind by 11,780 votes. Patty B. at Dirt Road Dems. Check them out. Follow them at Dirt Road Dems. They do incredible work. Lance Buckley, Lisa Rollison, Ren Special K. Cato, Mitchell, Sharon Tukulski, Jeffrey Kincher, Jeffrey Kincher, Star Lanus, and Roberta Reed. Sorry about those pronunciation foibles there. My bad. All right. Pete, before we get into the Costello, what about Bob scenarios that we had today, let's talk about the cross-examination of Michael Cohen real quick. Especially, I wanted to talk about what the media blew up with about the John Grisham moment, the Perry Mason moment, which I think was way overblown after reading the transcript and after seeing how redirect went. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this moment happened last Thursday, and it was part of a line of questioning, Pete, about the phone call to Schiller and Trump, where Cohen testified that he closed the deal and got the approval to close the deal, that Trump would pay him back for paying off the Stormy hush money, right? And apparently there were a few texts. This is from Trump's lawyers, Blanche, showed a couple of text messages that happened right before the call, like a minute before the call, same minute of the call. And these texts are between Michael Cohen and Schiller, in which Cohen was complaining about a prank caller, a 14-year-old prank caller who kept harassing him. And Schiller said, "Call me." So the call to Schiller lasted about 1 minute and 46 seconds. And Blanche was trying to show that Cohen called Schiller only about this prank caller, and there wasn't enough time in 1 minute and 46 seconds to have him hand the phone to Trump and say, so we're good to go with the Stormy thing? Yeah, we're all set to go. So he was trying to show that Cohen lied about what was said on that phone call. And he was yelling all dramatically in the court, didn't you lie? You know, like it was really over the top. And then reports came in saying that the jury was like raising their eyebrows. But after reading the transcripts, it appeared to me and seemingly a lot of others who, and I said, watch, they'll all start walking this back a little bit when they read the transcript. It appeared to me that that moment was not as big as everybody said it was, and that the jury was probably actually reacting to how overly dramatic Blanche was being in that moment. What was your takeaway from that?
Like, dude, why are you yelling, right? What's wrong with you? Look, I think it's really hard to tell. I do think, in the aggregate, and particularly after today as we tape on Monday, and we'll obviously talk about this later in the show, I think there is a lot of questions, if I'm a juror, about overreach by the defense on the one hand, some of the, the long-winded cross-examination they did at Cohen. But it is very interesting to me because I'll flip through, and I don't know what you do. I mean, I don't sit on one cable TV channel. I'll listen to what MSNBC has to say, then flip over to CNN, then flip over to Fox. And it's really interesting, this question, and a lot of questions about, well, how's it going? How was today? Was this good for the prosecution or not? MSNBC, as you expected, is, I think, in my opinion, fairly accurate, but I mean, that may say something about where I'm coming from and all this, but I've been really, in Fox, as you'd expect, it's travesty when they talk about it. A lot of times they don't even mention it, but I've been really surprised about CNN and the number of commentators they have saying, oh, this is terrible. It was bad for the prosecution. It was really, Cohen's credibility has really been challenged. And, there are a couple of folks that have argued the opposite, but it's been very interesting to me looking at the networks. But I'm with you. I think at the end of the day, I don't think, and you can't just look at the transcript. You have to have people in there who are sort of watching the jurors, and there's nothing like human eyes watching how people respond. I mean, we're all, we are products of our millions of years of evolution, unless you're Mike Johnson and we all, were there with the dinosaurs 2,000 years ago or whatever it was. But we have all learned to watch people, to watch their body language. You can be trained up on it. I mean, obviously psychologists, psychiatrists are, FBI agents are. You can learn the behavioral sort of aspects of how a person is responding to something. Yeah. But all of us have it. Right? We all exist in a society where we know and understand nonverbal cues. And if you're sitting in there and you're actually watching these jurors, and if you read the reporting from people who aren't just looking at the transcripts, who aren't just listening to an audio feed, but who are watching the jurors, I think there's a certain amount of aggravation with Blanche on the one hand, and two, when he's sort of going on and cross, and we'll talk about this later, frustration and boredom. So I'm with you. I don't, that's a very long-winded answer to saying, I'm not convinced this was some Perry Mason moment where, they totally torpedoed Cohen's credibility. Cohen, as much as a liar as he is, admittedly, as much as a crook, admittedly, as he is, he's a likable guy. And I think people, you get a gut when you're listening to somebody. Do I believe this person? What do I think of them? And you don't even necessarily have to like them, but you can sit there and say, I think they're telling the truth. And from what I've seen, I think this jury buys what Cohen has been testifying to.
I agree. And I think this is one of the best arguments for cameras in the courtroom, honestly. Yep. Because I see nothing but this hyperbolic language on the news shows and in the media. Cohen's ripped to shreds in cross-exam and, this kind of just really like over-the-top language. And, I understand you're trying to keep people tuned in. You're trying to get clicks and eyes and you're trying to sell something. But I just don't get the feeling that that's necessarily the case. And, like you said, based on all this. Now, we can go through and nitpick these things and talk about what the jury thinks. But honestly, when we get to the Bob Costello part of this show, he blew that. He just destroyed anything, any kind of chipping away at any credibility of Cohen that even existed in the first place, I think is just simply gone now. And so it's kind of all moot and academic. But, up until today, I also had a feeling that Cohen was being believable, likable, humble on the stand. He wasn't contentious. He did have a heavy sigh every now and again, but not the kind of heavy sighing that was going on.
Not like what was coming later. Dramatic foreshadowing. I see what you're doing here.
Dun, dun, dun. So aside from this dramatic Perry Mason moment everybody's talking about, there was a very tragic beginning of Blanche's cross-examination where he started, and we talked about a little bit about this on the bonus episode, where his first question was about himself, the lawyer. He was like, did you on TikTok call me a crying little shit? Objection. Sustained. Did you call me a whatever the fuck? Objection. Sustained. Sidebar. Stop making this about yourself. You can't make this about yourself. You can make it about Trump, but you can't make it about yourself. And there were just tons of sustained objections. He couldn't get into a rhythm. We talked about this a lot. And as you said, the jury was often described as being bored. Like, just not a good sign. And a lot of the big points, like this quote unquote inconsistent testimony about the text messages and calls to Schiller, came much later. I would open with that stuff. I would open with inconsistencies. I would go chronologically about his lies, his documented lies, his arrests, his perjury charges, his lying to Congress. And then I would talk about inconsistencies, but there was really no rhyme or reason to Blanche's cross-examination. And when you're boring the jury, that's not good.
Yeah, and another point to make too is, like, in having sat through a whole bunch of trials, jurors particularly want to like the judge. Now there's an occasional judge who's a jerk, but by and large, judges are as you'd hope. They're measured, they're kind of dry, they don't get emotional, and it's almost like it's their courtroom. They're running the court. I don't want to say that there's so much a parent figure, but they're clearly, and if they do it right, they are the authority figure. And the jurors, again, they want to like the judge because the judge is kind of controlling the narrative and the show. And if they're a reasonable judge, jurors want to like them. And jurors take a lot of cues from the judge. And that's why when Trump falls asleep, it matters because, it's disrespectful to the court. It's disrespectful to the jurors. It's disrespectful to the judge. But if there are things when, the judge is repeatedly saying, sustaining objections or overruling objections, and God forbid if a judge that the jurors like gets angry, be careful, because that is something that, again, it's perfectly reasonable, and judges are good, even when they get aggravated, not displaying any sort of emotion. But Merchan impresses me as a judge who is very thoughtful, very measured, and is the kind of judge that jurors are going to like, by and large. Not everybody's going to like him, but he comes across as not somebody who doesn't have control of the courtroom, not somebody who's clearly all about themselves and drama. He's a likable judge for the jury, and that's going to become super important. Again, more dramatic foreshadowing. Keep that in mind when we get around to talking about the testimony of one Mr. Costello that began today, that we'll talk about
yes, later. The C block. C is for Costello. We're definitely going to talk about him. And then, of course, there was no court on Friday, and they adjourned early on Thursday. Barron's graduation was on Friday. Trump managed to get there. He made it, probably much to the chagrin of both Barron Trump and Melania. But at the end of the day, Merchan said to prepare for summations on Tuesday, but that changed Monday morning. We'll talk about that and the redirect and recross of Cohen, along with the possible second punch landed by the defense right after this quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey, welcome back. We have more Hall of Fame patrons to thank. Meg Alexander, Greg Kreimer, Fran Reichenbach, Christine Tachner, Clover's Tree 73, Dr. David, Karen Sherman. Please don't read this on the pod. We don't need a call out. Thanks for what you do. Tiffany Trump was adopted, Laura Saba, and Pinky. thank all of you so much. I mean, you truly all have gone above and beyond, truly humbled by your support, thankfully for your support. And so just thank you so much for what you do for the program. So let's talk about what happened on Monday. First, Judge Merchan said, look, summations aren't going to happen Tuesday, which means they'll likely take place next week after the long 4-day weekend. Now, it makes sense, and a lot of commentators, and I agree with, we're saying that, hey, he doesn't want summations to begin or to have this either a big gap between the time that the jury hears the summations and then have to go on the long weekend and sort of think about it and then go into deliberations after that, or God forbid, get halfway through it. And so I think, and I agree, if this is the reason why he did it, he wants to just get everybody back, do the summations, get the jury instructions, and get them into deliberating without a big, again, not just a weekend, a long weekend in the middle of that. So makes sense to me. It'll take place likely next week, after, barring any surprise, after the long 4-day weekend. And then after that, there were a few discussions about upcoming evidence and testimony. First, Judge Merchan said a letter from Costello's partner to Cohen is hearsay and denied Trump's lawyer's bid to bring it into evidence. Next up, the defense wanted their Federal Election Campaign Act expert witness to be able to testify that Trump did not violate campaign finance laws. But Merchan denied it, saying, you know what? No, I'm going to limit testimony to explaining campaign finance law. Because you know what? At the end of the day, I'm the one who describes what the law is and the jury decides. And after all that was done, Blanche resumed the cross, and it really, Allison, really didn't go well. Like, from reporting, coming out of the courtroom, the jury seemed, according to observers, to be tired, to be bored. Blanche went back over the smoking gun document with Weissenberg's handwritten notes and gets into the Red Finch reimbursement. Now, for those folks who, many of our listeners know what the Red Finch is, but for those who don't, it confirmed what we have long known, that essentially Trump used Red Finch to rig a CNBC poll that never actually ran. The money, I think, was for a span of IP addresses that they're going to try and skew the polling results because Trump was worried about not looking good, but it didn't ever amount to it. Now,
he was in last place of billionaires or something, and they got him moved up to the 9th position. And
we're number 9.
Want to pay for we're number 9. I guess Trump wasn't very happy with that. But then we got to this moment, which was probably, what some people consider to be the second punch that Blanche was able to land to discredit Michael Cohen. And I again dispute that this was a haymaker for all intents and purposes, but he got Cohen to admit that he pocketed $30,000 of the $50,000 payment to Red Finch, times 2 after the grossing up, right? So he got $60,000, and he got him to admit that he basically stole that from Donald Trump. But here's my problem with people thinking that this could possibly tank Cohen's credibility. And again, whether it does or not, let's rewind a little bit and go back to the testimony of one Rick Gates in the Manafort trial. Because Rick Gates was the star witness. He was like the Cohen of the Manafort trial, right? And he admitted to stealing $3 million from his boss, Paul Manafort. And he spent that money cheating on his wife. And then we've learned through testimony from Rick Gates that he cheated on her 3 other times. So very unlikable witness, stole 100 times the amount, 1,000 to 100, a lot more money than Cohen is accused of taking from Trump, which, by the way, he said he was owed when he got shorted on his bonus in December of 2016. And I mean, he did pay, to be fair, $12,000 to Red Finch in a plastic Walmart bag with a signed boxing glove. And who knows the value of the boxing glove? So probably not $18,000. But, we know that was a payment to rigged polls. Axios came out with that reporting. We talked about it way back in the day. I must have 100 tweets joking around about, I'll just give him $12,000 in a plastic Walmart bag with a signed boxing glove. I've used that joke a million times. And anybody who follows me on Twitter would also be well aware of this having happened in the past to rigged polls for Red Finch. So given that Rick Gates was way worse of a dude and way less credible as a witness, Manafort was still convicted and convicted with a professed MAGA on that jury.
Yeah.
So I don't see how this would, like Cohen said in his direct from the very beginning. Yeah, I was a bully. I was a liar. I was a bad dude. I was doing all this for Trump. I don't think it's going to come as quite the shock to the jury that everybody seems to think it will. That, because that's, again, the hyperbole all over cable news networks today. Oh, you stole money from the Trump, but Cohen was a bad dude. Oh, okay. Thanks for letting us know. I just don't see that this is going to be a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of the frustrations I have watching a lot of commentators. I mean, there's some people who are prosecutors or defense attorneys who know better and who don't say these things, but it is clear that a lot of folks reporting don't routinely go to trials, because the fact of the matter is routinely you get cooperators who are dirty, who are awful people, who break the law, who cheat people, who swindle them, who do any number of bad things, and their testimony is still admitted and still relevant and important to the jury, and the jury treats it credibly. So you're absolutely right. If you want to line up, just for an easy comparison, Rick Gates compared to Cohen, what Gates did is demonstrably worse and was compelling to the jury. And so for commentators to get up there and say, oh my God, Trump's going to be so angry that Cohen stole this money from him, and the jury's going to be looking at Cohen as a swindler and a thief. You know what? Every single day across the United States of America, juries are presented with people who cheated, who lied, who swindled, who stole, and they take in that evidence and they use it to convict people. Now, the big wild card here is those people aren't Donald Trump, right? This is the first time we've ever had a former president in a criminal trial. So who knows whether the routine sort of, process holds for Trump. But make no mistake about it, this is absolutely routine. And the fact that people are getting, clutching their pearls or getting all excited about, oh my gosh, Cohen's being made out to be a bad person, get over it. Happens every single day in American courtrooms. In my mind, this is certainly Cohen is not nearly as bad as some cooperators that I've seen getting, torn apart on cross, that nevertheless the jury takes that information and convicts. So again, if dear members of the media who aren't prosecutors or defense attorneys who haven't sat through a lot of trials, please temper your comments about, what this means or doesn't mean, because I agree with you. I think Cohen, at the end of the day, as I said before, I think from what I've seen, the jury finds Cohen likable, believable, even likable, even though he's like a kind of a rogue. He's not a jerk. And, at the end of the day, think about it. When you talk to people, the people you tend to trust are the people who are genuine and not a jerk. They can have faults. They can have sin. They can have done awful things. But if they're not a jerk, if they're down to earth, if they look at you, you know what it is that when you're talking to somebody, you're like, oh, I believe her, I believe him, versus like, no, I don't know about this person. And everything I've seen reported, and every time I've watched Cohen, even though Cohen has an ego issue, Cohen doesn't like to say he's wrong. Cohen has all kinds of stuff that he's, focused on Trump about. At the end of the day, if Cohen is under control, just saying, answers in a consistent way to the jury, I think they're going to believe him.
Yeah, and here's a little bit of a problem with what the defense did with this eliciting the fact that he took this, pocketed $30,000 times 2 grossed up for taxes, is that the defense is contending that by the way, the defense never touched the $130,000. They didn't go near it with a 10-foot pole. But they're contending that this was a negotiation for his salary, and that's why he was paid a retainer. And that's why the business records and invoices said for legal fees. But it's kind of hard to acknowledge that $50,000 of that $420,000, we know times 2, is a reimbursement, and the rest of it isn't, especially when you don't talk about the $130,000. And I mean, because you're contending now that he has stolen his salary. So that could come up in summation. It just doesn't stand to reason. It's sort of, again, is one of like that one-legged stool on which the defense stands. And I just don't think it's reasonable to talk about the $50,000 times 2 being a reimbursement, but the rest of it wasn't. And I'm not even going to mention the $130,000. It just doesn't stand to reason.
Occam's razor. I mean, the most logical explanation is exactly the story that Cohen has told and that others have corroborated, whether that's, Stormy Daniels or David Pecker. It is exactly the case in the theory that the prosecution has laid out. Because if you start trying to get, well, it might have been this and it was actually stolen, the narrative doesn't make sense. And I think, in a good summation, I think the prosecution is going to lay out, it's a simple fact pattern. It is logical, and it is what all of these people have told you over and over and over again, and it's consistent. And, to that point, and you can tell, though, right? Because when they got up and Cohen had redirect from Hoffinger, it was quick and to the point. She had one question about, the big Perry Mason moment, and they said, well, and then based on that moved on. It was like, well, that probably is right, that it wasn't a big deal. And because they're jerks on Trump's legal team, they wanted to bring in a photo and video from C-SPAN which showed Trump and Schiller together just minutes before the phone call came in from Cohen. And this is a conversation where allegedly there was a 14-year-old prank caller and also a discussion about Stormy Daniels. And initially, as they had done throughout the entire trial, Trump's team said, no, we're objecting. We're not going to consent to the photo and video coming in because it's hearsay. And Judge Merchan said, oh, you know what? Yeah, it needs to be admitted. And they can't bring in the evidence without calling back the C-SPAN witness, who, by the way, is probably back down in D.C. right now. So the prosecution gets on the phone to go to Acela or go to Reagan National and get on a plane to LaGuardia and we'll get you here into the court. And Trump's team finally says, no, we object. It's going to take a long time. In the defense, we only have a couple of witnesses left. And so Trump is like, you know what? Fine. We'll stipulate to admitting this again. Not some weird, hyper-technical forensic expert analysis of a cell phone, a C-SPAN video and photo that 98 times out of 100, every other trial in America, the other side would just stipulate and say, yeah, that's fine. C-SPAN video, yep, you don't need a C-SPAN witness to get it in. You don't need a National Archive witness to get in this document. We'll just stipulate to it and let it in. And so then after that, Hoffinger's done. Blanche gets up to recross. While it's quick like Hoffinger, it was confusing. I don't think there were any big, wins for him. And then after that, that was it. Prosecution rests and they're done. And so with that, you think, well, all right, what could possibly happen? Well, Allison, there are two quick witnesses for the defense before they then called Robert Costello.
Yep. And I immediately tweeted, big mistake, out on Twitter. And boy, did that prove to be right. We're going to talk about Bob Costello, who he is and how it went. But we have to take another quick break. So everybody stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We have more Hall of Fame patrons to thank, including Kimberly D. Stephen. Boy, would I love to be the bus driver. David in Brooklyn. All podcast hosts are smoke shows. Change my mind. Jason B. Charles Jones. Nathan Dorn. Pete Struck's Ball Tan Salon. I didn't know you had a new business, Pete. Mr. Halfspeed. BackdropBooks.com. And Scott Gregus. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. All right. Who's Bob Costello, Pete?
So Bob Costello, you may remember, has been, first of all, he is a MAGA true believer through and through. He believes in Donald Trump. He was in the Trump orbit going back way to the Mueller times. And you might remember him from the second volume of the Mueller report, the one dealing with obstruction, because he was knee deep in all this sort of shady behavior of calling all these potential witnesses and saying, you know what? The boss really likes you. Hang tough. Essentially, don't flip. Don't snitch. We'll take care of you. And,
sleep well. You have friends in high places.
And the implication, if you do flip and or testify and or cooperate, we're going to come after you. So, he has been from early on and going again back to the, 2017 Mueller days, just one of these, and an attorney. Right. So not just some random schmo, a person who was a member of the bar somewhere, graduated from law school, practicing attorney, but just involved in the really, in the Trump orbit, the people who are not entirely qualified, who are entirely sleazy, who find themselves doing things that get them into reports by the special counsel in enumerated instances of obstruction that probably would have been charged, except for that the person who was behind them all was a sitting president, and an OLC memo says you can't charge that person if they are a sitting president. So, but for
and
that...
then Bill Barr wrote a memo saying, I'm not going to charge him with obstruction, even if he weren't a sitting president, which was Trump's golden ticket to not be charged. You show that to a judge, and 100 times out of 100, the case is going to get dismissed because an attorney general has made a prosecutorial discretion decision that they were not going to bring charges. And that's really hard to reverse.
Right. And so in my opinion, probably lucky that he is not a unindicted co-conspirator or worse, but just by virtue of the fact that Trump was the president at the time, like so many other sort of happy-go-lucky facts surrounding Donald Trump and all the people around him, somehow this person has escaped judicial accountability. But Allison, then he gets up on the stand today and walk through what happened.
Oh, boy. So right off the bat, he ignored a sustained objection, which seemed to kick off a series of sustained objections and reactions from him, a series of events that turned Costello the color of a strawberry, according to Hugo Lowell. Basically, Blanche here, Trump's lawyer, was trying to get Costello to challenge Cohen's waiver of attorney-client privilege, right? Because Trump sent Costello over to Cohen's. By the way, Costello has represented Steve Bannon. We'll talk about him later at Rudy's 80th birthday party. He is, by the way, suing Steve Bannon for not paying his legal bills. He was also subpoenaed by the Department of Justice in that Steve Bannon contempt case because of advice of counsel defense. Like they needed to know exactly what Bob Costello was communicating with Bannon. He's also, Rudy Giuliani's lawyer at this point. And so he went to visit Cohen right after the raid on Cohen's hotel room at the Regency because he was staying there because his home was being remodeled. The raid on his home and the raid on his, and I should say legally executed search warrant, not raid, on his office. And he was basically, much like Pasatino with Cassidy Hutchinson, sending a Trump paid lawyer out there to be like, hey, pal, I'll take care of this for you. Trump is your guy. You got to stick with him. It's a pressure campaign to not flip on Donald Trump. So Blanche was he's trying to be the attorney. There was never really an agreement or any kind of retainer agreement. Cohen said he didn't want or trust Costello to be his attorney. Costello saying, we got to keep this back channel open from you to Rudy now that you don't work for Trump anymore. So this is going to be how you talk to the big guy and how we tell you everything's going to be okay and not to worry. And so Costello's at the Regency talking to him. And basically what Blanche wants to elicit from him here is that what they discussed was attorney-client privileged information. But Cohen, as the client, waived the attorney-client privilege in this case. But I think Blanche is trying to contest that or whatever. But there were multiple sustained objections. And the very first one right off the bat, like I said, Costello ignored Judge Merchan's sustaining of the objection and answered the question anyway. And then multiple sustained objections later, Costello started grumbling audibly. And then he testified that Cohen told him multiple times that Trump had nothing to do with the Stormy Daniels payment. And then there were some more sustained objections, and Costello audibly said, geez. And that's when Judge Merchan snapped his head, looked at him and said,
that's when Dad got angry.
He goes, what did you say? And then Costello said, well, strike it. Wow. So Costello said to strike his own comment. That is something the judge does. And then, Pete, there was another sustained objection. And when Costello made a heavy, like exasperated noise, Merchan then excused the jury. And Mershon, this is high drama.
Yeah, and the jury, again, going back to what I said, the jury is watching all this. They are watching Costello be a jackass. They are watching Judge Mershon, who has been a very measured, non-emotional person, listening to this jackass on the stand. And suddenly, when after these multiple repeated times, they're like, you know what? And when the judge says, hey, jury, can you step aside for a little bit? Each and every one of them knew exactly
totally
what was going on.
Yeah, and once the jury left the room, Mershon said, Mr. Costello, I'd like to discuss proper decorum in my courtroom. As a witness on the stand, if you don't like my ruling, you don't say geez, and you don't say strike it, because I'm the only one who can do that. And if you don't like my ruling, you don't give me side eye. And then he looked at him and said, are you staring me down right now? And at that point, he cleared the press out of the courtroom and the video feed stopped. So, I mean, I don't know if the jurors can see now the press filing out of the courtroom or if they're in a separate spot.
No, they're back in the jurors room.
Because that'd be extra funny. Like you're a juror, like, oh, he told us to leave. That guy's in trouble. He's busted. And then all of a sudden the press piles out. Holy shit. And so he cleared the press out of the courtroom. The video feed stopped. And then when everybody came back, order was restored. He obviously admonished and maybe threatened him with contempt. We don't know. We'll probably see a transcript later, which will probably be out by the time you hear this podcast when it airs on Wednesday. But everybody returned. There were a few more questions from Blanche confirming that he believed that Cohen was his client, trying to, again, establish that attorney-client privilege, which is Cohen's to waive. And then Hoffinger got up for the district attorney's office.
Yeah, and one thing, again, keep in mind that Costello is an attorney, right? He's not some random dude, some PR flack. He's an attorney. He's been in a courtroom before. He knows he's a member of a bar. We'll see if he gets disciplined by any bar for his behavior in the courtroom. But the point being, he understands how you're supposed to treat a judge. He understands the decorum you're supposed to follow in court. He understands the penalties for behaving like a jackass and being held in contempt. And nevertheless, he's so far down the MAGA rabbit hole, he's huffing and puffing and jeezing and wheezing and, getting the jury excused from the room and getting yelled at. And again, going back to when they return, in the words of Hugo Lowell, sitting there red as a strawberry after getting dressed down.
He's obviously auditioning for a job in a potential Trump administration. But before you get into the cross-exam, the minute that the defense called Bob Costello, the reason I tweeted big mistake was because Hoffinger would be able to cross this witness. However, all that shit happened before the cross. We're not even there yet.
That's right. And so the first thing that Hoffinger does for the prosecution on cross-examination is to try and establish that landing Cohen as a client would have been a really big deal for Costello. And she introduces an email from Costello's son to his father saying, quote, wow, that's big news. Congrats, Dad. I hope this leads to a lot of good things coming your way. And then she proceeded to ask about the meeting between Cohen and Costello at the Regency to discuss whether Costello would represent Cohen in the search of his home, office, and hotel room. Now, remember, Cohen was suicidal that day and acting manic, and this is according to Costello. Hoffinger asked Costello about the meeting between him and Cohen at the Regency to discuss whether Costello would represent Cohen in the search of his home, office, and hotel room. Now, Cohen was suicidal that day and acting very manic, Costello says. Hoffinger begins to ask that, look, as a criminal defense attorney, you can understand how traumatic a search is, but Costello points at Hoffinger and says, well, why don't you talk into the microphone? Again, leading to some observers, a couple of jurors at least, sort of raising their eyebrows, saying, you know what, that's not something a
this
witness
guy's a
usually...
dick. That's what they're sitting there thinking. What a dick.
All of us. It is human nature. Put yourself in the seat of a juror. Put yourself as a coworker. Put yourself sitting in a restaurant somewhere, wherever it is. Listen to the things Michael Cohen said, and say, okay, how would you respond to that? And then listen to Costello time and time again saying, strike that. Why don't you talk into the microphone? At another point, apparently, he's talking about, Hoffinger says, well, how about the FBI raid? And Costello says, well, I don't think I'd call it a raid. I'd call it just conducting a search warrant. which, of course, if you remember back to Donald J. Trump talking about the quote-unquote raid at Mar-a-Lago, it is the height of irony that the FBI conducting a search warrant, which is exactly what they do, not a raid, that somehow Costello, again, is contradicting and correcting Hoffinger, saying, oh, it wasn't a raid, it was a search warrant. But again, just a jerk, and transparently a jerk to the jury. And, Costello did say that, hey, Cohen told him that 2 nights before, he was on the roof of the Regency Hotel and then he was going to jump off because he couldn't handle the ongoing investigation. And so Hoffinger asked him, did you tell the grand jury that Cohen was acting like a drama queen? So it was not, again, the takeaway, keep in mind, all of this in the span of a couple hours tops? He's come on the stand, he's grunted, he's geezed, he's rolled his eyes, he's talked back to the judge. It's gotten so bad that after being overruled so many times and continuing to do it, the judge has the jury leave, comes back in after being reprimanded and dressed down, and picks right back up. There's little doubt in my mind that these jurors, whatever positive things, again, we can argue what good they might have gotten through cross-examination of Michael Cohen. None of these jurors are thinking about that right now. Nope. Each and every one of these jurors are thinking about what a jerk and jackass Costello was on the stand.
And in order to bring him in, Trump's legal team had to have been worried that the jury was believing Michael Cohen. There is no way you risk Bob Costello on the stand in a cross-examination of Bob Costello unless you think that you're losing. Do you know what I mean? Like, the winner doesn't bring in Bob Costello to the stand. So that's a real bad sign. And I think that the jury can feel that, right? And Hoffinger's not done. It's going to be very interesting tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, which we'll obviously be reporting on next week because you get this on Wednesday. We record it on Monday. It's going to be very interesting to see what Hoffinger continues with cross-examining this witness, with cross-examining Bob Costello. She confirmed to the judge that she only has about 30 minutes left on cross. Blanche says his redirect would be very, very brief. He
didn't want any more part of that, but yeah, I bet it's going to be brief.
And then bombshell news, Costello says that, Blanche said that Costello is his final witness. Trump won't be testifying.
Wait, what? Allison, he said he was going to testify. He said it on the news to the media. He said he was going to testify. He's not?
The only reason Trump testifies is because we decided to record on a Monday afternoon.
Fair
That's
enough.
the only reason that Trump would testify. But yeah, so I'll be looking. I'm sure I'll be looking. I'm sure the media will be like, oh, Trump lied about the fact that he was going to testify. Blanche also moved for a mistrial. Again, he's done this a few times, claiming that there's no evidence the business records were falsified. He also asked a judge to rule that Cohen wasn't a credible witness as a matter of law. And it didn't sound like Mershon was buying it. Quote, so you want me to take it out of the jury's hands and decide before it even gets to the jury that this person is so not worthy of belief that it shouldn't even be considered by the jury? And then Blanche made the following arguments. He said there was zero evidence that anyone was thinking of campaign finance charges when Stormy Daniels was paid. Oh, are you admitting? Okay. Or when the meeting with Weisselberg happened. So this is finally their defense. We're finally seeing it. This is going to be their summation, right? There's no evidence that Trump was involved in falsifying the business records. Blanche said there's absolutely no evidence that Cohen, Pecker, Dylan Howard, or anyone else had criminal intent during the conduct at issue in this case. Notice he didn't mention Cohen because Cohen went to prison for it. Now, it seems weird, though, and also, I mean, Pecker entered a non-prosecution agreement. Who enters a non-prosecution agreement if nobody's thinking about crimes, Pete? And there's also a text message, by the way, showing Dylan Howard darkly musing that Trump may give him a pardon for his electoral fraud. Now, unfortunately, that tweet or that text didn't make it in because Dylan Howard's not here to testify. And Justice Mershon pointedly asked whether his position is that Cohen's testimony was an irrefutable lie that could nevertheless fool 12 New Yorkers. I thought that was a great question. Now, he did hear the motion for mistrial, Every other time, Mershon just ruled from the bench that it was denied, but he reserved his ruling, let everybody go home for the day because they were already there past 4:30. I wouldn't read too much into the fact that he didn't rule from the bench. He probably, normally what he'll do is he'll go away, take 10, 15 minutes to consider it, come back, give his ruling. So since this was the end of the day, none of those other mistrial motions, I mean, they came at the end of the day, but not at the past the 4:30 mark. He's probably just going to reserve his ruling for tomorrow morning. I'm assuming he'll deny it. So look for that. You'll know by the time you hear this. But that was the end of the day. And so we have 30 more minutes of cross with good old Costello. We'll see if he can prevent himself from turning red. I wonder if he's going to get a phone call.
Yeah, if I am the defense team, I am calling him and trying to settle him down and tell him how to behave and how not to behave, whether or not he'll be able to do it tomorrow, because I'm sure that, the prosecution still has some questions up their sleeve, and that Hovinger isn't done yet. I mean, typically you'll sit there and there's a pace and a flow to cross-examination, and you try and get the witness off balance and build. So I would be surprised if there were not more fireworks tomorrow morning. The best thing that Donald Trump can hope for is that his attorneys get a hold of Costello and say, what in the hell are you doing? Stop it. Just answer the question. Don't huff, don't puff, don't make snide comments to the judge, to the prosecutor, to anybody else. Just answer the question.
Costello acted the way the defense wished Cohen would act. Right. But Cohen's calm, cool, collected cucumber at that whole cross. Their jury's falling asleep. They weren't fucking sleeping today, man. They were being asked to leave the room. Bad for your first, well, I think it was the third defense witness, but the other two were just there to sort of verify or allow in some letters and documents. So, oh boy, very exciting day in court. And again, you will hear a break-in if some sort of amazing, incredible news that can't wait until next week happens tomorrow, which is yesterday for you, because we have that Tuesday that falls right in the middle of when we record and when we release. So we'll let you know up front. We'll break in and tell you if anything interesting happened that has to be reported to you before you get this show. We have more news, and it's all pretty fun. So everybody stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Thanks to our last batch of Hall of Fame patrons. January 20, baby. Catherine Gilbert White is totally awesome at her job. OMG, the Broncos drafted a QB. Kirkland J. Bateman, Suzanne Ashworth, David Chandler, a dinosaur in dental school, Deborah Kirby, Maria Tovar, Maris Lawson, and ATX Polar Bear. Thank all of you so very much for your support. You're amazing. You're awesome. And simply cannot thank you enough for your support. So let's Allison, let's pivot a little bit. Instead of talking about Donald Trump, let's go to Rudy Giuliani and his 80th birthday party. Now, leading up to his 80th birthday party celebrations, the evening of his birthday, he posted on Twitter, or maybe it was Truth, but I think it was Twitter, a post taunting 2 more hours and I'm in the clear.
Because that's not exactly how that works, but okay.
Yeah, the only good thing is like karma, whatever you think of karma and karma taking time, karma and Rudy Giuliani have a special relationship these past few years. And this was no different, because as he is at his party, getting a cake, being sung to, the process server shows up and actually participates, by some accounts, in singing happy birthday to him. And it's horrible. If you listen to the audio, it's like, God almighty, it's worse than a Laura Trump rock single. It is terrible singing. Nevertheless, apparently, process server, according to some accounts, is there singing happy birthday. And upon conclusion, immediately serves him his indictment. And according to some people who were there at the party, people are screaming, people are crying, people are rending their garments. People are just, just shook by the sheer injustice.
This process server sung the happy birthday to Rudy. And then, yay. And then you've been served.
Rudy, of course, denies it ruined his birthday. No, I'm fine. But I cannot think, again, the hubris of this man is just, I cannot imagine the flaming final crash of Rudolph Giuliani is going to be something to behold, because he cannot help but be a smug, stupid jackass. And it has been biting him in the butt for easily a couple of years now. Although, we're about to talk about how people recouping money against him are going, but I just couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
Right. And I think, honestly, the best part of that is that he put out that taunting tweet, "You'll never catch me, I'm the stinky cheese man," or whatever the fuck. And then Chris Mays, after she gets the call that he's been served, retweets that tweet and said, "You can't escape the long arm of the law," basically.
Yeah, and
it was just beautiful.
Yeah, I think he deleted it, and then she may have even replied to her initial tweet with like a screen capture of it, and it was like beautiful. It's like, yeah, sorry, buddy, the internet's forever. You're not going to escape that one.
Yes, especially Rudy's. Oh, goodness. All right, let's take a quick break from Rudy. We'll come back to Rudy in a second, because it's not going well for him in bankruptcy court either. But Trump has appealed officially his $83 million judgment in the E. Jean Carroll matter. That's E. Jean Carroll 1, which came after E. Jean Carroll 2, in which he got a $5 million judgment against him. But this is the $83.3 million one. And of course, with interest, 91 point something $million. And he had to come up with the bond for that. He used a Schwab account. This is the one that the Chubb Group actually backed. The ones who wouldn't back him on the $454 million that was reduced to $175. And he got the subprime car loan king to do that one for him. Anyway, that's this one. So the $83 million, which is 91, including interest. He's got a $454 million coming soon. Probably owes $100 million in taxes because of an audit that's going to be finalized here pretty quickly with the IRS that he was double dipping. Dude is in serious debt. I don't think that this appeal has a snowball's chance in hell, but he's filed it, and I think he probably waited till the last day he could file it. But here we are.
Yeah, it's like every other thing in Trump's life. It is kick accountability down the road. And if he can appeal, he's going to drag it out as long as he can and exhaust every possible avenue to justify. I mean, he likely knows he's not going to win, but if he can delay for, however many years until he's either president or dead, then, that's Barron's problem and malaria's problem. It's not going to be his. This is nothing new. I just feel bad. I hope Eugene is doing well and is comfortable, but I would love to see her enjoying, buying and then opening the Trump Foundation for Battered Women and Women's Reproductive Health Care clinic in, the former Trump Tower in Manhattan somewhere. But we'll have to wait for that.
Yes, indeed. All right, what's our last Rudy story?
So last one, back to Rudy. This is, speaking of people dodging accountability, the judge overseeing Rudy Giuliani's bankruptcy case said he was, quote unquote, disturbed that so little progress has been made in sorting out his finances, and refused on Tuesday to lift a legal barrier that has kept the former New York City mayor from appealing a $148 million defamation judgment. Now, you'll remember Giuliani declared bankruptcy in December after he was ordered to pay the staggering sum of that $148 million to two former election workers for spreading a false conspiracy theory about their role in the 2020 election. Since then, you'll be shocked to hear Giuliani has missed deadlines to file financial disclosure reports.
No.
Yeah, funny, right? He hasn't succeeded in selling residences in New York and in Florida. Last week, he was suspended from WABC Radio, where he had a daily show or what the station called his repeated violation of a ban on discussing discredited 2020 election claims. Rudy, you can pay all this money, but WABC is not going to be any defamation or other, expose yourselves to legal liability from your nonsense. So get out. So this is from Rachel Strickland, who's an attorney representing Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. Quote, "They have done nothing. They sold nothing. They settled nothing. And then she went on to accuse Giuliani of getting fired on purpose by, quote, deliberately flouting his employer's restrictions. And then U.S. bankruptcy judge Sean Lane responded, I agree with you. And I am disturbed about the status of this case. The judge rejected a request from Giuliani to lift an automatic stay so that he could pursue post-judgment litigation in the defamation case. Creditors' lawyers argued that doing so would delay the bankruptcy proceeding. Judge Lane also addressed a request from lawyers for the election workers that Giuliani be barred from making additional defamatory statements against them. While holding off on a decision, Lane said that there was already a court decision on the matter and that he was, quote, not going to let this court be used as a place where parties can flout the requirements of the law, unquote. Tell your client to stop, Judge Lane told lawyers for Giuliani. Quote, it's not complicated. So lawyers are going to go back and meet with the judge again on Thursday, tomorrow, to discuss the case, and God knows how that will turn out.
Tell him to stop. It's not complicated. Apparently, it is for one Rudy Giuliani. Also, I just wanted to get this in before we, I would be remiss if we didn't talk just for a second about this. Trump Media and Technology Group, Pete, that's the company affiliated with True Social, reported $770,000 in revenue for the first quarter, Q1 of 2024, and a loss of $327 million. I had to triple read it. So he made $770,000, lost $327 million.
Yeah, there's some extra zeros in there. Allison, I'm beginning to think that I need to question the business acumen of Devin Nunes. Maybe it could be that there's not some great conspiracy. Maybe it's just that this company sucks. And, after the stock, I think, tumbled 5% today, I don't know where it's going in aftermarket trading. But at some point, those ratios of revenue to net loss is not gonna get it done. But hey, they can maybe get some more NFTs of Trump, walking with Jesus on a beach or riding a lion, or sell one of his suits that he wore and snip it up into tiny little swatches and sell those from the Manhattan courthouse to $1,000 a piece to donors. But
well, before we get out of here, there seems to be a little bit of an update from Roger Parloff on what Mershon said to Costello when everybody was out of the room. He says, my understanding is that after Mershon cleared the courtroom, he put defense witness Robert Costello on notice that his conduct was contemptuous, and if he did it again, that Mershon would remove him from the stand and strike his testimony in its entirety. So, and boy, if today's shenanigans weren't enough to turn off the jury on the credibility of Costello, which actually bolsters the credibility of Michael Cohen, by the way, if that wasn't enough to do that, certainly having your entire testimony stricken from the record and you being removed as a witness from the stand would do it. So
I gotta think.
We'll see. Yeah. We'll see how he behaves tomorrow. It could be, I don't know if he can control himself. He seems like a pretty angry guy putting on a show for one.
As an officer of the court, I would not want that sort of behavior on the record, hanging out there for somebody to file a bar complaint with the New York bar authorities. But hey, that's just me. Just me. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think you care about your legacy, which is something that these Donald Trump sycophants really don't care about. You saw him out there squawking out in front of the courtroom today, getting yelled at and harassed. They couldn't even get a word in edgewise,
Today was like the land. Every day has been the land of misfit toys, but in particular today, they had Bernie Kerik, the former New York police commissioner convicted of tax fraud, who spent 3 years in federal prison, later to be pardoned by Donald Trump. You had Kash Patel and, the crazy, what was he, deputy undersecretary or something in DOD, and again, Devin Nunes, sycophant on the House Intel Committee. But it was just, it was really I mean, when you get to the bottom and it's like, oh my God, these aren't even C-listers. These are like the D-listers of pardoned felons. And they're the ones who are sitting up there. Again, the opposition, you're right. They finally got their act together and there was like vigorous cowbell and bootlicker, big signs like bootlicker that they were holding up behind them at the podium. So the counter protesters
just debasing themselves, just embarrassingly debasing themselves on national television because, of course, the press is covering it. How embarrassing. Just what a shit show. And, you know, there's multiple anti-Trump protesters, not any pro-Trump protesters. And of course, Trump is trying to say they won't let him in. There's so many cops around. I've never seen anything like it. Big, strong men, tears in their eyes, couldn't protest on my behalf. No, they're allowed in. There just aren't any. There just aren't any except for the sycophants that you drag down or up from D.C. to come and kiss your ass on and flout your gag order on national television. That's it. Those are the only people whose careers you could hurt. They're the ones that are up there kissing your butt. That's it. No actual other human beings with no skin in the game. Anyway, thank you all so much. Thank you all to our Hall of Fame patrons that we shouted out today. We love you very much. If you want to become a new patron, you put whatever name you want. We'll read it on the air. You can do that by going to patreon.com/aisle45pod, AISLE45POD, and you can help support this show and independent media. We love you so much for doing that. Thank you. Thank you. We are already deep in the works planning our next DC Gala for patrons. It's going to be absolutely fun. It's going to be at a great location. I can't wait to share it with you. So keep your eyes open for that. Any final thoughts before we get out of here today, Pete?
Nope. One thing I'm curious about, apparently after the session today, Trump went out and said, I think, positive things about Costello, but in any event, talked about him.
He named him.
Again, the gag order is pretty specific that witnesses, again, it doesn't matter whether you're saying something positive or negative. The gag order says you are not to discuss them. So, well, that might be interesting tomorrow to see if the prosecution decides to raise the issue of Trump violating at this late stage, days presumably before the case goes to the jury, whether they're going to raise that issue.
Yep, we'll let you know. And again, if something really jaw-dropping happens on Tuesday, we'll break in with a little update for you on this episode. Otherwise, we'll see you this weekend on the bonus episode for patrons and on the public episode next week. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Struck.
Cleanup on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.